Firstly, I've got an unruly puppy at home, so if you hear some barking, that's because I've just put him in his pen for 15 minutes. So apologies about that. I'm just going to give a very, very quick run through on some of the things we're seeing in the cybersecurity landscape. Before I do, Crossword Cybersecurity, we're an AIM-listed cybersecurity company. We build products and provide services to help reduce risk for clients. We're more or less end-to-end in terms of how we look at cybersecurity. So we will help companies improve their governance, risk and compliance. We carry out penetration testing, threat intelligence and monitoring. We also build software from IP that's spun out of universities. And our main product is a supply chain risk management tool, which I'll talk about a bit later. Relatively high profile board and exec team. So just calling out Sir Richard Dearlove, our chair, former head of MI6, who we're extremely lucky to have. And Tom Malube, the founder, who's a serial entrepreneur and currently chair of the Rugby Football Union. Okay, so just a few stats. I mean, you only have to Google cybersecurity to see all sorts of statistics about the cost of breaches and the volume of breaches and things like that. I just wanted to call out a couple of things that the number of breaches actually went down last year, which was a bit of a surprise, but many people think that's actually down to the reduced volume of trading during COVID, but actually the cost of a breach actually has gone up, the average cost, and it should be fairly obvious that when you've got people working at home, that increases your threat landscape. Do people have decent cyber hygiene at home? Are they protecting their home networks? But also with people working from home, it's a lot easier for hackers to try and target isolated people where they don't necessarily have someone next to them in the office who they can potentially check. And we've had a very busy 18 months, and we're getting calls almost on a weekly basis of a client who's been breached. And a lot of the breaches are normally, as you'd expect, financially motivated, where a hacker will get onto a company's network. They'll do a bit of reconnaissance, they'll work out some of the payment processes, start doctoring emails and things like that from suppliers. I've lost count of the number of times a client's phoned us and said, we've just paid out anything up to, I think, sort of 8 million was one of the biggest payments that we saw out to basically hackers, and of course the money disappears. So it's very common, and a lot of the companies are sort of well-known companies that you'll all have heard of. So no one is really immune. The two areas that we're looking a lot at the moment is supply chain attacks. So we have a tool that looks at this. Hackers typically will target company supply chains. If you've got 5,000 suppliers, it's quite difficult to then manage the risk across that supply chain and ensure that they've got good cyber hygiene themselves. British Airways breach was a fairly high profile one a couple of years ago. They were fined, I think it was a couple of $100 million by the ICO, not to mention some of the civil cases that are going against BA and the cost of fixing the breach. And then TravelX last year, which caused a fair amount of disruption across the banking sector. So supply chain risk is a huge problem, and this has been going on for years and will continue to be a massive issue. And most companies are not particularly good at managing the risk across their supply chains. It's a very difficult task. The other thing is we're seeing a lot of is credential stuffing. This has increased dramatically over the last couple of years. Credential stuffing is essentially where someone has got your password and login for one website, and they will then run a whole series of that password through a whole series of tools where it will just go through the internet and try and log into as many websites as possible. They collect stolen credentials, and then these are available not even on the dark web. They're available on the internet if you know where to look. But also what hackers are doing as well is they're taking over accounts and then selling access to the accounts. So if you're a criminal who wants to get access to certain companies, you can just buy the access on the dark web. So credential stuffing is a massive problem. One way of preventing that is multi-factor authentication. So apologies if I'm stating the obvious, but when you go to make a payment from your bank, and then they will then send you a text with a code, that's multi-factor authentication. But it's not always possible in some industries to use that. So gambling and e-commerce, for example, they don't like to use multi-factor authentication because it affects the volume of sales. So they need to look at other tools to try and prevent or spot credential stuffing attacks. So that's, I was told to keep it to 8 minutes. That's probably slightly shorter than 8 minutes, but that's it from me.